We have here today with us Mrs. Jacqueline Leader, née Rothschild.
That's correct, yeah.
You were born?
I was born on May 13th, 1934 in Antwerp, Antwerpen. And my family had moved to Antwerpen in 1930 already from Frankfurt after I think my father had been beaten up already at that time and named many different names for being Jewish with a name like Rothschild. So he wanted to actually go to America where he had some sisters, and he went to the American consulate, and there was a depression here. They said it's not a good idea to go to America, you're going to lose all your money. At the time my parents still had money, and they suggested that he tries to go elsewhere because they didn't want to get new people into the country in America because of depression. So my parents thought they were going far away, and they went to Belgium, which I guess it was out of Germany, but and they went to Antwerpen where my father had another sister. And when I was born, which was, they were there for 5 years, I think, yeah, 4 years, they moved to Brussels. My father did a lot of traveling, and there was less travel involved. There was an hour between Antwerpen and Brussels, and you always had to go through Brussels. So they decided to move into the community of Brussels. My grandparents lived in Antwerpen, and so I got to go back there quite often, but I was mostly raised in Brussels.
You said you went back quite often.
To Antwerp. It was only an hour away.
Who
Brussels.
did you have there?
My grandparents.
The grandparents moved too?
My mother, in 1933, I think, she went back to Germany, and she just pulled her parents out. They lived in Wiesbaden. She said, "You're going back now." Somehow my mother could see the scenario, what was going to happen, and she just forced her parents to come back with one of her sisters, who later on married Eisenman. That's the family. I grew up in Brussels. I had 3 brothers, so I was the 4th. I was the youngest. We lived, I guess, comfortably in a nice house, and belonged to the German Jewish community there, you know. We were strictly Orthodox, and until the war broke out in 1940. And I do remember waking up that morning. I was like almost 6, and I heard all this noise outside. There were a lot of airplanes, and so my brother shared a room with me. He went to the window, and he said, "Oh, it must be thunder," and the light, and it was the most beautiful sunny day, but we didn't know what all this noise was about. Yeah. And
we'll get back to this in
yeah.
a moment. Yes, you said before your father didn't want to travel. What was he doing?
No, my father was traveling, but it was shorter from Brussels than. He was supplying shoe factories with. Like the forms, the shoe forms, threads, notions to shoe factories around the country. And he was representing, I think, German companies, if I'm correct.
He brought that along already from Germany? Or that was
No,
something new he built up?
He had been in metalworks in Germany. He was director of a factory in metalworks. I don't know too much about it. But he started all over again when he came to Brussels. And so he picked the shoe line, and he sold shoe forms and all the accessories that you needed to make shoes. He also had somebody who designed shoe fashion, and you sold them, you know. High platform, low platform. I remember looking at these things. I don't know too much about it, but my father traveled a lot. And
your mother was helping in business too?
Probably in the office, yeah, but she didn't go out with him. She stayed home. I do remember her at the typewriter a lot and so on. So I don't know. My mother was involved in many other things, you know, B'nai B'rith, and which over there is not like here. It's Orthodox. She created the B'nai B'rith in Brussels, and she worked for Jewish committees. I don't know too much about that. I was 4 or 5 years old.
You didn't miss her at home, being out a lot?
No, she was home when. No, I didn't miss her. But I always had a au pair, or somebody was taking care of me. It wasn't exactly my mother who took care of me. We always had a lot of guests, a lot of singles and people that came from Europe who needed places to stay and who needed places to eat. Remember, we always had a lot of people around the table, and I never knew who they were. So, but then I wasn't allowed to eat at a grown-up table except for Shabbat. We had to have criteria first, how you eat properly. I think it was how to eat a fish without ever touching it, but using the fish fork and the fish knife. When we passed that test, then we were allowed to eat at the grown-up table. Now, I mean, I always ate at the little table in the kitchen. That was the custom in those days, I guess. But my mother was in the kitchen. And we had a very normal, lively household.
What was the spoken language at home?
My parents tried to insist that the children only talk French with them so that they learned the language. They were German speaking, and we were not allowed to talk anything but French in the house. That's how they learned their French, from the children going to school. So our house was strictly French speaking, at least with the children, and the children to the parents. But when I went to visit my grandparents in Antwerpen, there they talked Flemish, which is a dialect of Hollandish, and my grandparents talked German. So I had to learn a little German in order to be able to, oh, I think my great-grandmother lived there also, in order to converse with my grandparents. And that's how I learned German, because later on during the war, they moved into our house. When all the Jews in Antwerpen were taken, somehow we got them out, and they lived for many years with us. I had to talk German to my grandparents, but French to my parents. And that didn't seem to be any problem whatsoever. You know, children, it's not a problem. I knew exactly who I had to talk what to. We also had adopted a little boy for 5 years. This little boy was 2.5, not 3 yet, when he came on a children transport from Germany to Belgium. His mother was a widow, a young widow, and the only way she could get out of Germany was by being a maid in England. But she had this little boy, so her brother was about 25, was in Brussels, and she told him her problem, and he said, "It's not a problem, you send the little boy to me, and I will take care of him, and then later on, we'll reunite you." And so this little boy came to Brussels. Well, this bachelor said, "What do I do with this little boy now?" So he put him in pension with my mother's cousin, who needed the money at the time. They had come from Germany also, they needed the money. So she took care of that little boy who was a year younger than me. And then came the war, and her husband and her son were taken and sent to camps in France. And she was stuck with this little child. And there was no more money. This uncle paid her every month. There was no more money coming in. She was beside herself, so my parents said, "You move in with us, and we'll see what happens later on." So she moved in with that little boy with us. She was heartbroken. Her husband then wrote from Theresienstadt. "Oh, it's wonderful here." She believed him. Everybody tried to tell her, you know, they're only writing that because it's censored by the German. She wouldn't. She volunteered. She took a train to Theresienstadt to go and join her husband, and that's where she died.
He too?
Yeah, of course, and her son too. And the little boy was with us. My mother, she was going to put him in the orphan. My mother said, don't put him in the orphan home. We'll watch him until we go. We were waiting for our papers to go to America. Until we go to America, then we'll put him. In the meantime, you leave him with us. Well, the war in 1941 with the States started, and we couldn't get out anymore, so we kept him till after the war. And after the war, we sent him back to his mother in England. He's now Professor Shlomo Deschen from Kfar Saba. And so he joined his mother when he was maybe 11. He hadn't seen her since he was like 2.5, 3. He was kind of scared to go back home because it was so strange, you know.
You're still in contact today?
Yeah. Yeah, he's always trying to pick my brains on certain things. He forgot so much. And he even went back trying to find the places where we were, etc., etc. I never had the nerve to do that, but he tried to do it. And he changed his name and all that. His mother was in Manchester. By the time he joined it, she had married a rabbi, but this rabbi died a few years later, so she and her son came here to Israel, Shlomo Deschen. And so he was with me. He was the only child that I had a kesher to during all these years. You know, we did everything together. My mother was determined to return him. She always, I overheard my mother so many times telling my father, if anything happens to any one of these 2 children, I am going to volunteer to go with them, no matter what. I have to return that little boy. His mother is expecting me to return him after the war. And obviously my mother didn't realize what the things were. She was determined, but thank God we returned him in good health. And my mother always felt this and many other things was the reason the family survived the way we did.
Like what?
Well, the fact that my 3 brothers survived, I survived, they survived, we were a family. It was very unusual. I remember after the war, wherever I went and I saw the other children who they didn't have, if they were lucky, they had 1 parent, I would go and tell them I don't have any parents, because I felt that I'm going to make them feel so bad that I should have 2 parents, and they don't have any. So I used to go around making believe I had no parents. I was an orphan. I remember a small child going around telling, well, I'm an orphan too, you know. Just, it was so unusual to have a whole family being saved. You didn't want people to give you kind of horror. I mean, it just was unusual. And my mother did a lot of very, very important work, underground work, and she worked for the Jewish Committee, and with that, she was able to help a lot of people. They would come to her, and she would get them the place. I remember I went several times that our house was on the tramway, on the bus street stop, and there were parents who had gotten their children out of Poland and so on into Belgium, and they put them in the orphan home, and then they asked for them back. The children were upset and they wanted to go back. It was maybe 1940, 1941, and every 2 weeks there was a train going back to Poland with all kind of children. They would sleep in our house overnight because in the morning they could go early in the morning. I remember these children, and they went right back to concentration camps. They were taken as soon as they got there. But the children were homesick, the parents were homesick. The parents insisted on getting the children back. I remember every other Tuesday, children sleeping on the floor in our living room. And then later on we realized that they all went to their death. They might have been saved in Brussels.
And it was already too late, you already realized.
Didn't want to stay. The parents begged to get them back. That went through the Jewish Committee. my mother hid a lot of children because many years back in the middle 30s, the children of a cousin of my grandmother went to Budapest to university, and there they were converted somehow to Christianity, Catholicism. It was a brother and a sister who came from home, university. Then they were sent to Brussels to a convent, and I don't know where this father, blah, blah. I don't even remember their name, but I remember this man coming with a big brown outfits, and he had to wear a Jewish tie because his identity said monk from Jewish descent. He was not allowed to be in the Goyish house. He had to be in the Jewish house. If he ever was caught, then he would be in big trouble. And through him, whenever my mother had children that had to be hidden, she would tell him. She had a code, who to call, where to call. He would notify his sister, who was a sister somewhere else, a nun, and they would find places in all the nunneries to hide children. So a lot of children, and that's how at some point several times I was hidden also in different monasteries or whatever. But through these two people who were Jewish birth. Their own parents died in Theresienstadt.
What happened to them after the war?
I have no idea. I don't know. I don't know.
I
don't know. Maybe my mother knew. I never even asked my mother. But they probably just stayed in the, wherever they were completely devoted to their religion. But it's almost like Hashem made them in order to save all these children. Because we had an in immediately through them. I don't remember the name. They changed the name when they become nuns and so on. They have to accept a name from the nunnery. Marie-Louise, I don't know. But I only know the monk. The monk, because I remember seeing my father having discussions over Chumash, his interpretation, and then finding my father say, I can't discuss with this man. It's, it was all completely, but that's how they were able to take care of some Jewish children or get extra help when they needed for certain places. So.
Still one more thing before we're going to get now. Your experience in the war. Kindergarten, did you go to before the war?
Yeah, I went to kindergarten, the regular public kindergarten. I don't remember too much about it. We didn't live in a real Jewish area, so I might have been one or two Jewish children there. I don't remember too much about it. But I do remember the kindergarten that I was at, and that's the same school as I went to first and second grade, and then I didn't go to school till the 5th grade.
That was on purpose that you went to public school? No, there was no Jewish kindergarten?
No, there was no Jewish kindergarten. And I think it was more that people were trying to hide in the non-Jewish, if there were no Jewish schools either. I would imagine so, because my brothers, none of them went. Everybody went to public schools. And maybe in Antwerp, but at that time, I think the Jewish schools only came after the war. During the war, or before the war, I don't know.
So your parents' acquaintances were mostly also immigrants from Germany?
Yeah, and somehow Belgian Jews and Polish Jews and German Jews, they all kept their own there.
They did not mix.
Mm-mm. The Germans, they have their nose up and they think they're better than the others. And so I guess they didn't mix so much with what they called the Polish Jews. And the French stayed away from all of them. They were the Vatikim there, the Belgian Jews, right? So they didn't want to have anything to do with newcomers. But my parents had some Belgian Jews.
They wouldn't help, though, the Belgian committee to help the immigrants?
I don't know how much they helped. I don't want to say one way or another. I don't know. You're asking me now from before the war. I don't know. During the war, it was all one committee. I think my parents were working for maybe, well, it was the Belgian committee. It was called the Belgian committee. They obviously had some pull or something that they were able to get in there. Once you worked for this in the committee, you got a special identity card that, until further notice, the Germans were not supposed to send you to concentration camp, to send you away, like, you know. They saved all these people for the very end. They were going to take them anyway, and everybody knew that. They weren't going to leave any Jews around. But somehow, my mother was a tough little lady. She went right up to the Gestapo, and she told them, why do you want to take little children? They're such a pain to you. And she was so shaky when she went up, but she said, I'm going to go in there and I'm going to take a chance. And she told them, give us your little children under 6. Why do you need babies? They're nothing but troubles. Because when they caught the Jews in Brussels or all the other cities, they sent them first to Malines, and from there they sent them out. And these babies, Malines you didn't kill, because you didn't want anybody to know that they're going to be killed. These babies were a lot of problems. So my mother went right up to them and they said, okay, we're going to call you and you can have your little Jewish bastard or whatever they called them, you know. And whenever they had a little baby, they called my mother and she went right in there. They kept them first in jail. She went right in there in jail. She never knew. She would come out and she brought those babies out and brought them to the orphan home, and some of them grew up there.
That was already during the war, and when the Germans were there.
During the war, yeah. Yeah.
Is there anything you used to remember from before the war you want to add still?
I remember there were always new people coming. That's all I know.
Anti-Semitism?
I don't know anything about that. When I was, I was 5, I was 4, I don't know that much. Europe was full of anti-Semites, so.
No, never called you in kindergarten, whatever, on the street?
Oh yeah. I mean, during the war, the early years, yes, definitely. But that was accepted. You didn't, it was accepted. I always felt very ashamed to be a Jew because I was called name behind my back. I look Jewish, and but you just accept it. That's it. Goyim don't like Jews, and maybe Jews don't like Goyim. I'm not sure. I'm not sure, but it wasn't open. It wasn't open, and I don't think that the average Belgian person was as anti-Semitic as some other nations were, or like the Polish people or anything like that. I don't think they were. Sure, there was a problem. They became anti-Semitic because a lot of Jews came in with money, and that sometimes creates, they come in with all that money, and creates a little bit of jealousy among people. So then the Germans offered a price for each person that you reported who was caught. You got money for it. A man, you got 1,000 francs. A woman, 800 francs. A child, so and so many francs. So if they would report people, they would get money eventually. So that's where the anti-Semitism came. The ones who reported you sometimes reported you for the money. And there were a good amount of Belgium Christian whose son decided to go with the Nazi party. They wore these black things and they did that, 16-year-old kids and so on. Belgium basically was overrun in 3 days. They really couldn't fight the Germans very much, and then the Germans just took over the country and tried to work on the youth and getting the youth. But I remember there were a lot of families where the parents were definitely having problems with the children because the children became SS. And the parents were not. The parents were not. I remember some of our neighbors would say, stay out of the way when you see my son coming in his SS. He sometimes brings friends or stuff like that. They would warn us, just stay out of the way. Don't look through a window so that they won't see you. They won't know that you exist. Because we told them that you're not there. My son is coming in this Friday night. You'll see him in his black uniform with his friends. They would warn us. Be very careful at that time. Not just one family, several families. Our neighbors knew us already because my parents had lived there 10 years or something like that. So they were sympathetic. They were sympathetic. They didn't. But we didn't. There weren't too many Jews living in our neighborhood. One in this block, one in that block. So it wasn't a major problem. And the Gestapo didn't hang around there too often. They.
So you were telling me before the day war broke out.
Well, when the war broke out,
so you went to the
I
window.
remember looking and didn't understand what my brother's talking about. He said, "Oh, the thunder and lightning." And it was bright, sunny, and the airplanes were going all over the place. He didn't realize that it was the airplanes. It was the attack from the Germans onto the Belgian people. And that's on the May 10th. That's when May 10th, 1940, is when things completely changed in every Jewish household. At first, my father was taken. Every Jewish male who was not born Belgium was called an enemy from the Belgian people because he was German. My father was born in Germany, so he was sent to a certain place in Belgium, and from there they were going to go to France. And it happened that you needed money in the house, but the banks all of a sudden, that's what the problem was, you were only allowed to get a certain amount of money out of the bank. So first my parents sent my brother, my younger brother, and he came back. He said, I had no problems whatsoever, everything was fine. So my other brother went there, who had just turned 18, and he absolutely didn't come back. We didn't see him, nobody knew what to do. So my father decided to go and look for him. So my father doesn't come back. So now, they both were taken there. They took him right inside the bank and shipped him, and somehow, I don't know the details, my father managed 2 days later, he showed up again. He was back.
Where were they taken to from?
Some place outside of Brussels. I don't know where. And my father came back, he told them he has a family, whatever, but my brother didn't. He was sent to France, to Saint-Cyprien, I think. I don't know, a few camps in France where they put. And we tried to get out and go to southern France. So my parents had a car, and we had our family, except my older brother, and then this cousin of my mother, and a little boy, and I think somebody else, I have no idea, and a little bit of bed linen or whatever they had. Two of the boys, I think two of my brothers, they had to attach with bikes and strings or something to the car so they wouldn't get lost, because there was no room for them in the car. And it seemed like the whole Belgium, the whole Brussels, everybody was on the road. Everybody tried to go to southern France, thinking that they won't be invaded the way Brussels was. But we never made it. They sent us back, and they sent us to La Panne.
Where did you get to?
The Battle of Dunkirk. We were in the Battle of Dunkirk. And I remember the flames and the bombs bursting, and being in a hotel, and there was no water to turn off the bombs that bursted in the basement, so they used wine. That didn't help it much. They opened up the bottle of wine that they could find there, and they poured this on top. But anyway, we were in the we were in Dunkirk for a few days until Belgium gave up, and then we slowly. All the borders to France were closed. My father tried them all, and we went back to Brussels. After a few weeks, we went back to Brussels to our house.
So on the way, where would you sleep? Where would you be?
I have no idea. I think they went in hotels. basement rooms. I remember when I was in the Battle of, you just knocked on anybody's door and you wanted to basements or stuff like that. I don't know where we were. I remember my mother and I running up and down streets and nobody would let us in. Finally, there was a movie house and there were some soldiers there. I think they probably were English soldiers. My mother asked them, is it all right if we sit here till after the bombing? And they said, sure, go right ahead. So my mother took me, and a bomb came right into the movie house and everything went into flames there. But she had her fur coat, even though it was May. She wrapped it over me, so I really didn't get too hurt. I remember seeing all these shrapnels and all these things in the air. And I don't remember where the little boy was. Oh, he must have been with the others of the family. I don't know. But the rest of the family was somewhere else. And then we just ran up and down streets. That's what I remember. Until we found my little brother, who was 9 or 10. He found us and he showed us where the rest of the family was. And there they were like a little room like this. And you could go in from the street. It was like a basement room. And it must have been like 30, 40 people, lots of people in that room. Everybody was trying to hide from the bombing outside. And eventually the bombing stopped and the English went back to England with whatever they could find. The Germans were there and they were there to stay. And we went back to Brussels. And at first, I think things were kind of quiet. And then one thing after another, you know, children not here, you're not allowed to go out after 8, you're not allowed to go to parks, you're not, you know, you have to wear the star, which I thought was, oh my God, I have to go around telling everybody I'm Jewish. And my brother said, you should be so proud to be a Jew. I'm so happy to wear the star. How can you say that? He was the big Zionist who came here right after the war. He thought it was the most wonderful thing to wear a star. And you know, I was 6 and I thought it wasn't wonderful at all.
You were taken by surprise when the war broke out?
It seems like we were. It seems like my parents were. They did not expect this to be happening. But again, I don't know much about politics at age 6.
Oh, that means nothing was prepared or anything?
No, nothing was prepared. Only after this happened, I remember taping up windows so that it wouldn't break so much, trying to get whatever food you could get into a house, mostly taping up windows, making little surviving kits that they carried around wherever they went, with tincture of iodine and bandages and whatever, so you had a first aid. But I don't think they were prepared for this at all. Probably if they had been prepared, the Belgian people would have been prepared to fight back. They lost after 3 days, 4 days. So, and the Holland people also gave up, and everybody gave up. And the French people gave up too. They just took over one country after another. So I don't think any of them were prepared, and the Germans were prepared. Come to think of it, nowadays this couldn't happen with television and all the other media. But in those days, you only saw what you saw in the paper, and what in the paper may not always have been correct. Whatever the country allows you to print in the paper. I don't know. But I remember in 1941, there were a lot of soldiers in Brussels, and I was on the street, and several soldiers were there, and they were making fun of me, look at that little Jew kid, and whatever. And a trolley car was coming, and I was walking in front of them, I guess, or something, and one of the lady soldiers there just gave me a push. You Jew kid, get out of my way. Deutsches, Jüdisches, I don't know, whatever they say. And I fell under the trolley car, but I didn't really get run over because the driver from the bus trolley car was able to brake, but I did have, I don't know, scars, and I still have it here. My whole arm was cut up, and my face was cut up, and holes in my head, and they took me unconscious to a hospital, and I guess contacted my parents, I don't know too much, and of course the German lady took off the soldier woman. I didn't realize, I guess, a Jewish child wasn't supposed to walk in front of a soldier. And
you were alone at the time?
the little boy was with me, my little friend. I was waiting for my mother to come from downtown, and so I remember that event, and I remember having to go to doctors, and the doctors wouldn't see us anymore after my mother had been their patient, family patient, you know, family doctor for many, many years, and all of a sudden you come in when you really have a problem, and they said, "I'm sorry, Mrs. Rothschild, but you know, it's against the law for us." My mother said, "There's nobody in the waiting room, nobody will see it, and I will pay you." "I'm sorry, but we can't do that." They wouldn't treat us. I remember having abscesses in my mouth and, you know, full of pus. My mother wanted to take me to the dentist. The dentist wouldn't take me on either. Although my mother always thought he was her best friend. A nice Belgian dentist, but the true coloring,
So what did
either
you
they
do?
were afraid or nothing. You wait till the abscess goes down, you eat up the pus, and a week later the pus comes back. The whole war was like that. Oh, big cheeks, because I had a bad tooth that had to come out or something. I don't know what I had. But all I know is that I remember walking out and asking my mother, why didn't he want to take care of me? And she didn't answer me. And only when I overheard her afterwards, I said, well, they don't want to take care of Jews or something like that. I couldn't understand, why not? Why couldn't he take care of my tooth? But in the hospital, they took care of me. It was Catholic hospitals. The nuns did take care of me. So
You must have been in hospital quite a while.
I don't know. I know I had a sling, and maybe 6 months till I was back in order. And I remember that the Germans called my mother down, my parents down, and me, I had to go to court. And they accused them of not taking care of the children, and they had to pay for the lights and whatever happened on the trolley due to the circumstances. And of course they couldn't tell them that it was a German woman who threw me under there, you know. But that was in 1941. And in 1942...
When did you stop going to kindergarten or school?
In 1942. That was the end. There was a lot of talk before, and it was going back and forth, and finally in 1942, no Jewish child could go anymore to school, and the Germans had been sending letters for my 16-year-old brother to come to work camp or something like that. And my parents, he was on a hashara out of the country, out of the city. My parents said, he's on a hashara, we'll give him the letter when he comes back. And right away they told him, you got to get out of here, because they're after you. He had a few letters, and they were going to come at night, and they were gathering all the young people for their work camp in Germany. So they got what they call a Führer, who was going to take my brother over to the borders into Switzerland, because my aunt lived there. And I don't think he was going to take him to Switzerland, but over to France, and from there he was going to find his way to Switzerland or something like that. They paid a lot of money. Then my younger brother, who was 12, said, I'm not staying in this country, I'm going to. And my parents said, you're much too young, you're a little boy, you can't go. I am going, and if you don't let me go, you're not going to find me in the morning, because I'm going to be gone. And finally they agreed to send him with his brother. My parents paid this Führer, who went every other Tuesday, a lot of money. And then the man came back and said the children arrived well, and so on. And we had no idea that he never took them anywhere. He just took them a little bit in Brussels, out of Brussels. And before the borders, he said, you go through these woods, and then you'll see a fence, and you go over, and you'll be safe. Well, they weren't safe. And the man just made a lot of money doing that. Every other week he went, and he took 8 or 10 people, and he told them, and be very quiet, because the Germans are right in these forests, and they're looking out, and my brother always says he saw the true color of people. There was one lady who had a little baby, and they wanted, and you had to be very, very quiet. You didn't want the Germans to hear you. So they were afraid the child was going to cry, and they wanted her to kill the child. They wanted so that we all going to die because of this one child. It's better to have one child die. It was a little baby, I don't know how old. And I don't know what, and that's when my two brothers got away from these people. My brother said, you could see what terrible people these were, to even suggest, and they went on their own. And somehow they made it to France, where I had an aunt, and from there they got lost and they separated. So my 12-year-old brother knew he has to get to Basel. He has to go to his aunt. He knew his aunt's name and address and everything. And so he went on roofs of trains, you know, flat and so on, where nobody would see him, and he would go near farmers, make believe because he had no identity card that he could show. They would see right away, hey, this is a Jewish kid. And somehow he went through wired fences, and he got there. He got in Switzerland, and in Switzerland he got arrested. And they contacted my aunt, and then they said that he was a Jewish midget, that he was a midget and a spy. And the Schweizer put him in jail somewhere, in Zurich, I think. They put him in jail in Zurich. So my aunt got him out for his bar mitzvah, for just the Shabbat, and had to bring him back. And then later on, he had to go and have papers. It took so long before they were convinced that he was not a spy. He was very short. He was a little 13-year-old kid. He just turned 13. They said no 13-year-old kid can go from Belgium to Switzerland by themselves. And but then he stayed with my aunt for the rest of the war. He was in Basel. He went to school in Basel and all that.
And the other brother?
And the other two were also somehow they were caught at the Grenze, at the frontier, and they were put in Switzerland in jail at first. That's where they met each other, and then they were in camps. I don't know, different named camps. They were moved around every now and then, but Switzerland had a few camps. At least you didn't die there, right? But it wasn't pleasant, but you didn't die there. And that's how they waited out the war. Every now and then they would get a permit to go for Shabbat to my aunt. That was possible to get, but you always had to come back, and even my younger brother, he always had to go and get from the city, from the, I don't know, whatever, certain papers that he was correct, and you had to have those papers.
But your parents knew that they were safe?
I think my aunt wrote a card, the girls arrived well, or no, I have visitors from little nieces, and so on. You know, you had to read in between the lines. You couldn't say the sons or this or that. Everything had to be hidden. So they knew they were there. They had no idea. My parents had no idea. They thought the Führer took them there. He told them he took them there. They paid him a fortune. I remember they almost sold the whole house, all the art, everything, in order to have enough money for this man. And then he never, there was a Belgian, a guy, he became very rich. He did that many times.
So when did your father have to stop making business?
In 1940. In 1940, I have no idea how they managed. I think my parents had money before, and that's what they survived on. But I remember every week you would see something that wasn't there anymore. An art picture or special books, I don't know, different, you know, things that were eventually furniture disappeared and so on, rugs. Whenever they needed money, they would somehow. And I think some relatives here in America through Spain were able to send some money to my parents every now and then, but I don't know exactly the details on that.
So what would your father do then all day long?
He worked in the Jewish committee, the Belgium Jewish committee. There was an office there, and he would go in there, and I don't know what his work was, but getting things from the Red Cross and stuff like that. The Red Cross was kind of active, and I don't know, so maybe he got some money from there. That could be, because, well, when we were hidden, that cost my parents a lot of money for us too. And that was for a little over a year. And then they also had a hidden apartment, many hidden apartments. So whenever there was heavy air, they would take off and then they would come back. I don't know. I mean, you know, it's law of necessity. There's all kind of things. I don't know exactly. But I know that by the time the war was over, there was nothing left. You know, you had to start all over again. There was nothing left, but we were all...
As long as you went to school, you would go in the streets freely, or just when you had to?
You went to school? Yes, I'd say you went freely. In 1942, that's when you had a problem. That's when you had a problem, because that's when they started making you wear the star. And you knew whoever was walking like this, all of a sudden all the Jews had something with their arm, and they all had to walk like this because they could cover it up that way. But you weren't allowed to cover it up. If they caught you covering up, that's it. And no matter what your item was, if you were in your house, you had to have it on your blouses. If you were outside, you had to have it on your coat, or wherever you went. You weren't allowed to go between certain hours on certain days. You weren't allowed. That's in the very beginning. To go on the street, you weren't allowed to shop in Goyish, and there were no more Jewish stores, so you didn't get any stamp cards. That was not for Jewish. In order to get groceries, you had to have stamps. So the Jews did not get any of that. But if you had the nerve to go out and nobody recognized you, if somebody recognized you on the street and knows there's a Jewish kid, you could disappear. That's how a lot of people got taken, walking down the street, and all of a sudden a Gestapo car comes up to you and takes you in. You can look as Goyish. I remember my mother all of a sudden became a blonde. Everybody said, why are you doing that? So they won't recognize me. They won't think that I'm Jewish. Anybody was dark, they thought was Jewish. Didn't even look what it's blonde. And you have to disguise yourself. But I don't know. It's there was, for instance, there was one person that was known in Belgium, in Brussels, to be a Masserer. Jacques. And Jacques would come by, and you could fight him. And Jacques' own wife and children had been taken. No? He was Jewish, and his wife and 3 children had been taken. So he went to the Gestapo after he came home, and he saw his wife and the 3 children weren't there. He went to them and he said, I'll do anything for you. You give me back my kids and my family. I'll tell you where all the Jews live. I'll help you out. I'll work for you. I'll do anything. And his family was already out to Auschwitz in one of the camps. So he got so mad that he decided he wanted everybody else to go there too. And he would sit in the Gestapo car, drive down the streets. He recognized a Jew, whatever, they stop there, this is a Jew. And people were trying to explain, they had fake identity. I'm not Jewish, my name is so-and-so. Get in the car. You'll explain it over there. And you couldn't get out of his clutches. You couldn't get out of his clutches.
And in the end, he was taken too.
I don't know. He was going to be taken, but somebody said that he got away to Spain. I don't know. He caused so much grief. It was just incredible that a Jewish person could do that. He was big, fat, Slav, looking so Jewish, and I don't, he wasn't even Belgian born. And it just, He just did it out of spite. He just did it out of spite. I know they were going to take him. They were going to take every Jew left on September 5th, 1944. And he was included in there, and the orphan homes were included, the old homes were included in there. And the English came in, surprise, on the 3rd. And the Germans started running away. So they never got to get that last razzia in. But they had heard the last razzia, and I remember having said goodbye to my parents because I was in monasteries at that time. I was in many places, and I don't remember where I was. When I came back from being with these people, the Collignols, who raised me into a good Catholic. I didn't go to public school there because I was Jewish, but the priest came every day for 3 hours, every morning from 9 to 12. The priest came to teach that little boy and me our catechism and everything that we didn't know. And the holy water was waiting to baptize us. My mother had asked that they shouldn't baptize us. So, but they said, if the Germans ever come here, we will throw the water on you, and that will make you safe. It was so simple. That will make you safe. I believed it. I was a kid. I was a confused kid because I was saying all my Ave Marias and all that stuff with the beads on the high chair, and then I would say Shema loud for the little boy to say after me because he didn't know it. And you know, I knew I was Jewish, and yet before you go to bed you say your Shema. But before that we had a lot of prayers to say in Latin and in French. And when we went back, and the people were very nice, and I got to eat there. I was on a farm, like. Actually, the man was a mayor of the city and a professor in the university. And I wasn't allowed to have any contact with my family, but once a month he went to my parents to tell them that we were well and to pick up his money. And then one time, after a year, my mother came to visit us, and she was just so, it was very difficult to get to where we were, and it just, you know, she had to wait till he took her. My parents didn't even know where we were. And she saw that we became complete Catholics. We did nothing but pray all day long. And we went to the church and we decorated the statues and all that kind of stuff, and my mother was shocked out of her. So she asked the man soon after. She told them that they couldn't afford it anymore, which there was a lot of truth, I'm sure, and they would like the children back. And the man said, I don't think my wife will give you the children back. She is so attached. They never had their own children. She is so attached to these children that I'm not sure. I have to find out. And there were always a lot of people in that house. I was hidden in a certain room because there were people coming in and out, and they had us out of the, but every now and then she would introduce me. This is my nephew, and this is my niece, and this is my nephew, and this is my niece, and my nephew, and my nephew. A lot of nephews from all over. I was a child. I didn't know too much. I didn't think they talked German. They talked French even, but it didn't matter. And then finally, the man went back to my mother after a few months, and he said, you know, my wife is afraid for the safety of the children. They're coming now a lot to private homes when they think, and there are some people in the village who know that we're hiding these children. And we feel that their safety might be a danger, so we are going to bring back the children. And it turned out that this was a very good thing to do, because the lady had a heart attack a few weeks later and died. And all these nephews that she was introducing were parachutists, English and even American parachutists, that they were also hiding. They were hiding all kind of people. That's why she was worried about us, that people from the village were wondering what's going on in that household, and they expected Nazis to come and check up on them anytime. I mean, sometimes there were 8, sometimes there were 6, there were always different people. And I thought, oh, these people have a lot of relatives, but you know, a child, you don't think too much. And so they were hiding parachutists who came down and couldn't go back to England, or I know they had 2 Americans also. And that was the end that we heard about them. We really didn't hear too much, except that he came to tell us that his wife had died and how much he missed us children. And the little boy that was with me, he went back to that village and he tried to recognize the place and so on. But of course, none of those people are still there. So
let's go a bit chronologically now. In
right.
42, there came the big.
In 42 to 43.
In 42 actually came that big change.
Right, and that's what my parents sent me out of Brussels to.
So when your brothers
hiding.
Went,
yeah, I went in hiding. Yeah, I went in hiding with that little boy.
Why did you feel you were in danger too then?
I guess they did feel that I must have been in danger because they hid me in the country at those people. They paid for it, and
then you went to those people.
Yeah, till 43, till November 43 or something like that. Then when we came back, I think my mother put me in different orphan homes. There were some Jewish orphan homes that the Germans knew existed, and they were going to take all these at the end. In the meantime, they made believe that they don't want to hurt the Jews. It's all right, you can have your orphan home. So I went to several of them, and I know I went to one of them, Rue des Patriotes, for the longest time. And Mr. Bamberger was running it at the time, and they had like something, they tried to teach the kids a little bit of schooling or whatever, you know. In the orphan home, there was no, there were no books or anything of that nature, but they tried to teach the children. All these children had lost their parents and they were found on the street or whatever. You know, the Jewish committee would hear about 2 children are left in an apartment by themselves, and they would take them out and put them in. They had different orphan homes throughout the city, and so I was put there. But then in 1944, in March, they knew that this was going to be now, everybody's going to be taken. So all of a sudden, the Jewish committee dissolved all the orphan homes, and they put the children, a few children here, in convents with the nuns. My mother was able to do that through our nun, our cousin, the nun, and we were put in different orphan, in different nuns, and every time you went to a home, I know, we all had a different, you got a new story. Because you weren't allowed to let any of the other children who are there in the convent, there were other children, there was a school in the convent and so on, to let them know you were Jewish. So they gave you a story. I was lucky, my name was Jacqueline, so that's French. So I only got a last name different, and my parents died in bombing, I come from the country. I remember I always had to practice a new history. I don't know what I would have done if they would have really asked me. I was, you know, so many different stories. I must have had.
Always together with that little boy?
Wherever I went, my mother managed to get the little boy together. And we were, until September, we were, I don't know, some of them were around, I don't know where we were. They wouldn't allow us to know even the address. We were here for 3 weeks, and then when somebody got wind that these might be some Jewish children, all of a sudden they moved us to the next convent. And then we would stay a few weeks there. You know, sometimes a kid would give it away, or an older child would give it away, or we even had a few kids who insisted on wearing yarmulkes quietly when they davened, and so on. If a Goyish kid would have seen that, right away he would have known, hey, we have some Jews here. And the word could spread, and before you know it, the Nazis would come. So whenever something like this happened, we were moved. Yeah?
A year you were there by those people?
Yeah, a little bit more than a year. Yeah.
What was their name?
Collignon. Collignon. He was the mayor of the city and a professor in Brussels. So once a week he always came to Brussels to teach in the university. And it was a little village.
How did your parents find these people?
Through our Goyish relatives. Maybe these people said they were available. I don't know.
So then, towards end of 43.
Right. So when I came back, different people offered to keep us in, to hide us for a short period of time, and then they got scared also. You know, if they get caught, or if we get to a window. I remember one time trying to look out, and somebody must have seen. I opened up the curtain a little bit wherever I was. I wanted to see what the outside world looks like. Next day, they had to move me. Somebody came and reported that they think these people are hiding people up there. Later on, we found out they were hiding some other people also, and the other people were the one who looked out. But I always felt guilty. I thought, oh my, this is, and my mother said, didn't we tell you not to go to the windows, not to look out? I said, I just looked a little bit, but it wasn't me. It was other people that had been hiding there also. So and then I remember it was on top of a grocery store, or it was in the basement of another grocery store with Goyim in the area. They were nice enough to take us in, 2 children, and we weren't too much trouble, you know, but it's dangerous. They were very good Goyim there. They were very good Goyim who really wanted to be helpful, but then it got serious, it got dangerous for them. So all I know is all of a sudden my mother would show up again and said, we're going to a new place, you're going to see how beautiful it is there. And it was always the same. Either it was an attic or it was a basement, so that the rest of the family wouldn't know that we exist there.
In the basement, it was winter, it was cold.
It was winter, it was cold. I always had very bad frostbite. My fingers were always oozing with pus, and my feet also, always. I guess slow, maybe, I don't know if it had to do with not the right diet, or I don't know what. It had to do with being frost. It was a very cold winter, and there was no cold for anybody, not even other people. When I was hidden with the Collignos, they cut down trees and so on. I couldn't believe there was heat there. I mean, this was really special. There was heat there, and there was food there. They also, if they wanted to kill, they would go into their basement and kill an animal in order to get food, but you weren't allowed to do that either. So they were hiding, doing these kind of things. And I knew that I wasn't allowed to eat certain things, but I think they fooled me a lot. I don't know, oh no, this is you're allowed to eat that, you're allowed to eat that, you know. But they never tried to get me to eat pig or rabbits or any horse or anything like that, you know. But I don't think I was very kosher in those days. I don't know too much, but I always told them, I'm not allowed to eat this, I'm not allowed to eat this. But they had butter, and they made their own bread, and like I said, I remember sometimes they would disappear for 3 days, the lady and her entourage, making all kinds of things out of the animal that she killed, that they killed, you know. The Goyim weren't allowed to do what they wanted either. Somebody wanted to be nasty, they could always tell on them.
So
yeah, but at least I had their heat and blankets, a bed. They treated me very nice.
So how was this change for you from these people getting back to Brussels?
Very, very difficult. Very difficult. I mean, so difficult. Because before leaving them, they reminded me that you have to continue praying, and if your parents won't be able to give you a praying chair, which is a regular chair but it's higher, then you're allowed to pray on a regular chair. but you must pray. And they told me what I have to say, all my catechism and all my different things. And always remember, I know they're your parents, but the Jews killed baby Jesus. And all I remember is seeing that little baby. And I look at my parents, and then I look at my grandma and say, oh my God, they killed that baby Jesus. They killed the baby. I couldn't stand it. I couldn't stand being close to my parents, because all the time I remember what these people said. Remember, they killed baby Jesus. The Jews killed. And this is what I had been taught for a year and a half, that in my catechism they would show pictures. And you would see always a little baby in the creche, and then a Jew with a long beard, and that always meant to be a Jew killing, not explaining that he was killed by the Roman, or that he was, in my child's mind, he was a baby when he got killed. Jews killed baby Jesus. And so it was very difficult, and I remember my mother crying and crying because she saw me davening all day long. And that little boy, we said whatever they told us. And my father trying to soothe and said, don't worry, they're going to get away from it, just leave him alone. And I would cry and scream if she wouldn't let me do it, because I couldn't understand why I wasn't allowed to pray when these people told me, whatever they do, remember, you have to pray. So eventually it went down, just like my father predicted. But at first it was very difficult to adjust to the idea that I was Jewish, having been even though I knew all along I was Jewish, having been in the Goyish world, trying to hide my Jewishness, and then all of a sudden seeing my parents and knowing that I'm really Jewish. But you adjust, you realize that was a hard part.
When did your grandparents move to you?
My grandparents moved to me when the Germans came to their house trying to get them, and they weren't there. And somehow they called my parents, and my parents said, you immediately come over here. Don't even go back to your apartment. And they gave them a couple of rooms in their house, and then my parents had a hidden apartment for my grandparents. But my grandfather kept on saying, I didn't do anything, why do I have to hide? He would walk and buy a newspaper, do things like this on the street. And people would tell my mother, we know that your parents are hidden there and there. We see your father walking around. I could not make my grandfather understand. He said, I pay my taxes. I did everything right. Why would they want anything from me? And I'm German. You know, he was still from the old school. So, but he had to go out and buy cigarettes, and he went on the street when he was supposed to be hidden. It was a big problem. My grandparents were a big problem to my parents, but somehow they made it. And
they made it? They were never caught?
No, they made it. And they came here, and they're both buried here in Israel. I remember the Gestapo coming to our house. They always wanted our house to make it an office building. They knew Jews lived there. My mother always told them, I think you came to the wrong house. This house, she said, we'll be glad to move out and give it to you. But you know, this is not the house that you need. You want to make offices, don't you? These are little rooms here. They're not going to be good. Why don't you go and try to find another house? And if you can't, let us know. We want you out by tomorrow or by 2 days later. She said, come back and let me know. But I'm telling you, this is not the house you want. She did that a few times. And eventually they must have found other houses. I remember the Gestapo coming in and saying, are there any Jews here? Or something like that in the house. And for some reason my mother had hid us in the closet because she didn't expect anybody at the door. She put us in the closet. She said, don't move. And we hear, Gestapo. And she said, you know, I work for the Jewish Committee. I'm exempt. Oh, well, tell me, are there any people living in this house? Any other people? She said, of course not. Would I do fine? Well, my grandparents were upstairs, and somebody was visiting them. My mother was so scared that somebody could want to walk down the steps at that moment. I was there, and that little boy, who the Gestapo, he wasn't part of my parents' family. But my mother got him to leave. And then she was wondering, where are they going now? And that happened to be the night of a big razzia, and so many of the friends were taken that night. But somehow she got them to leave. It was just unbelievable. Unbelievable. So she figured there must be some work that she had to do. I don't know, that was my mother's idea. That God had to keep her because of that reason.
So she was exempt from being taken?
She was exempt until month by month. Eventually she knew very well, and she knew the date that they had, somebody had tipped her off, everybody will be taken on a certain day. It was the 5th of September, something like that. So my parents decided, well, by then I had said goodbye, I was in monasteries and so on, and they wanted to go in the apartment that they had been paying for many years. And then the goyim said, oh, I'm so sorry, but we have guests there now, we can't take you in there.
Oh, they had prepared already a place.
My parents had paid for 3 years, one room where they had put their Jewish books, and I think they had a Sefer Torah, I don't know, and a few things like that. They had put it in that special room not to be in the house, so that the Germans wouldn't get, it was among God, you know, and they paid for that room all the years, and they figured if they ever need an emergency, a place to go into, they'll go there. And then they tried to go to these people, said, I'm sorry, but we have our family visiting us, and we can't take you in now. My parents thought they were very good friends of theirs. And so they went to many neighbors and asked if they could just stay for 2 days. And nobody wanted to let them in, so they went back. They went back, and they were waiting for the Gestapo to pick them up. And just then, the British came in the day before, and the war was over. The Gestapo, it wasn't over completely, but they had no more time to come and pick up Jews. All they did then is just run away. They ran away with baby carriages. They ran away, you know, their belongings in there. They ran away on foot. They ran away with bicycles. Whatever they could find, they ran away. They got scared, the Germans. Later on, they came back again, but it was different. Somehow the Jewish problem was not.
And your parents were never caught in the street?
Not to my knowledge. Not to my knowledge. Not to my knowledge.
So except there for the end, they were always in their own apartment, that same apartment all the years?
Yeah, I don't think they were always there. They were, like, they were, yeah, no, they were in their house, but they went out whenever they heard that a razzia was coming. They had paid somebody for the information. Somebody, a Belgian, who was a secretary to the Germans or something, and she knew what was happening very often, not always. So she would give him a phone call and say, listen, get out tonight. And my parents would notify as many of the people as they knew, get out tonight. The word spread around very quickly. And so everybody would try to find a place to get out. They had them on regular, and they paid this lady on a regular basis for the information. So
they know that they were looking for them?
Mm-hmm. They couldn't understand why so many people aren't there. They would say, how come nobody is there? And they knew exactly where the Jews lived. But of course they always caught, you always knew they caught. You knew when they were trying to get more people in, when they had, let's say, 9,000 Jews in Malin and they needed 10,000 to get the train off. So you knew, now it's going to get very bad. And you also knew they liked to do things like around Jewish holiday, Tisha B'Av. These were the worst time always. They enjoyed doing that. They knew that already. But I don't know all the details. I wasn't privy to that because I wasn't home. I was hidden, and I only heard from little bit here and there, put it together from what my parents were talking.
Who took you from place to place?
Not my parents.
So there was quite a while you had no contact with them?
Right, right. Very often I had no contact for months at a time. It took me from place to place, Goyim, that my mother would ask to do that. Please take from there to there or something like that, so that it looked legitimate. And
how did this affect you? You were not petrified
was
the whole
extremely shy, extremely introverted. Well, first of all, I don't know, but it affected me in such a way that I really hated who I was, couldn't understand why I was Jewish, why I couldn't be not Jewish, and then I wouldn't have all these problems, right? The other kids were doing things that children do, etc. So I don't know on the whole how it really affected me, but I wasn't a normal kid. I was an old lady at age 10 or age 8. You know, you weren't a kid. You had feelings, you had inner, like antennas going all over, and you could just feel what was happening in the air. I don't know. I really don't know how it affected me, but it wasn't 100% normal. I don't think I was. And when I had to go back into the mainstream and go back with school, that was very difficult. To look in the guy's face was very hard for me. Not that I had a persecution complex, but I knew that the Jews were not loved. The Jews were not loved, let's face it. And of course, coming to America, then it was a completely different world over there.
When did you get back to your parents?
In 1944.
In September still, or only later?
Yeah, it was still in September. Maybe it was a week or two after the war, and all of a sudden somebody came, maybe my mother came, I don't know. Now the nuns came, the home came, the war is over. I said, the war is over. I mean, this was incredible. The war is over, and we went back to home, and that was a time of great happiness, you know. I remember going to wherever I could find soldiers, American soldiers, English soldiers. I didn't know English, but I would go and I would tell them to come to my house, come to my house. I wore a big star. Finally, I was able to wear my Mogen David, so they should know that I'm Jewish, because my mother said there are a lot of Jewish soldiers out there. And they would always give me chewing gum or candy bar or something. I would go to the soldier camps. I would hand out my parents' cards and say, come and visit us, come and visit us. And one afternoon, there were like 13 soldiers came to the house, and my mother said, where did they all come from? And I said, I invited them. And my mother said, but you know we have nothing to offer. My parents had nothing in the house, no food whatsoever. I don't even know what I lived from. Absolutely nothing in the house. She was so embarrassed. She said, I have nothing to offer these soldiers. And they told her right away, they said, and she told them, they said, we didn't come here to get food. And next day they came and brought food. They were Jewish. They were Jewish. The Jewish soldiers, that was just heroes to us. And wherever I went, I just invited them. It was so funny. Me and the little boy, we went around to all the tanks that we could find and all the trucks. Say, come to my house, come to my house. I had learned that sentence, come to my house. And I gave them the address, my parents' address, their cards, you know, and Sorchelt. It was really, really funny when all these people showed up. And but it didn't last. Then they all went to war, and I bet you a lot of them got killed afterwards, because the war then really started, not for the Jews, but the real war started. You had the big battles, and they all had to take off again. And some of them were very nice. They saw that I had all this frostbite and this pus, and they invited me to come to a clinic, and they tried to take care of give me special creams
none of those places where you were that took care of it?
That was the first time that I had seen a doctor, yeah. They said, come tomorrow to this and this clinic and we'll take care of you. And I don't remember. I think my mother sent me by myself. She said, you go and ask for Captain Cone, and he said he'll take care of you. And they did. They bandaged my hands and gave me cream for my feet and stuff like that. That was quite, and I collected chewing gum. I had no idea what chewing gum was, but everybody said, you're gonna see the soldiers and they have chewing gum. That's something so special. I had no idea what chewing gum was. And they would give me chewing gum and I would eat it and swallow it. It was very funny. But these were better times. It only lasted a few weeks. Tanks going through streets, and you know, it's something like when you had here the Yom Kippur War many years ago, the air of jubilation and victory. But then it started later on when the survivors came out of camps. And that was a very difficult time. When you saw the first survivors in their striped outfit coming, and not my father, but my mother was still working in the Jewish committee. And she would help these people when they would come in. Somehow she had gotten money from UJA or somewhere to help them out, and they were looking for their relatives, they were looking for the families. Everybody would come there, put the names on. It was very difficult. Sometimes, I remember one time my mother came back, was very upset. She had a waiting room full of returnees from the camps, and one man walks in, and they all jump on him and they were going to kill him. He was a couple. And she said it was just unbelievable. They were tearing at him. They were going, and he probably deserved every bit of it, but she couldn't allow him to get killed right there in her waiting room. She finally separated him. No, I guess she gave him some money. She said, don't ever come back here. And this happened all the time. This happened a lot. If they would recognize a couple who gave them such a hard time, these people were, you know, I mean, they had gone through so much. And whatever was behind it was very difficult. It was very difficult. Husbands and wife, you know, didn't my wife come back yet? Didn't my wife come back yet? Trying to, they would always come and check at the committee to see if their relatives had come back. They would sleep at the train stations waiting for the relatives to come back. Children would be at the train station thinking their parents came back. It's very traumatic times.
Must have been very, very hard on your mother to work with that.
Yes, it was. It really was. It was very hard. She was completely dedicated to her work, not to motherhood. I didn't see my mother that often, but when I did see, she always carried the whole world on her shoulder.
So you started going back right to school again?
Yeah, they forced me to go back to school, and that was so hard because in Belgium you have two languages, Flemish and French. And I had been 1 year first grade, and the second grade I had this, and I don't know, my frostbite and all that. I couldn't go to school for a long time because I couldn't write, so I hardly went into second grade. And then third, fourth, and fifth was the war. So I came back, I don't know if I went back into fifth or sixth, and it was really, really hard. The principal insisted that I go back with my old classmate where I belonged. My mother really wanted me to go 1 year under or something like that, so I get a chance, but they wouldn't allow it. They said, no, 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 she'll do all right, she'll do all right. And it was so hard. I remember struggling, not knowing anything. But eventually I made it, and we came to America in '49.
So your father started back with business?
At first he did in Belgium. My father was afraid that there would be another war with Russia. He was afraid. He said, I don't want to be in Europe anymore. I want to get out of Europe. Whatever, I have to get out of Europe. And we just went to America where he had two sisters, and they bought a farm there.
That was a few years though. It was still a few years, from 45 to
yeah, right.
49.
Yeah. What did he do for business? I guess something trying to sell maybe the same kind of things he did before in the same field, something. I'm not sure. I can't even remember. I think that's what he did. He went to shoe factories and sold threads and things like that that you needed for shoes, linings. I think he probably tried other things too. Plastics came out at that time and they did things like that. But in '49 we came to the States where my parents bought a farm because a lot of new immigrants went on farms there. You didn't have to know the language or anything like that. And that was only for 4 years. When I got married, they joined me in Baltimore, and my mother became a executive housekeeper in a nursing home, and my father was a dining room supervisor there. And they lived in Baltimore. My mother made Aliyah when she was 72 years old, and my father had died already.
In America.
And yeah, and I kept on saying, why do you want to go to Israel? She gave me once this funny answer. She said, maybe I can be an example to others. And so she made Aliyah at a late age, and she lived here till she was 92. She died 2 years ago. Yeah.
Your brothers, did they come over to America too?
One came straight from Switzerland to fight in the War of Independence here, and he's been in Israel now since 1945, maybe 46. The only thing that my parents asked him is to go through a legal Aliyah, not illegal Aliyah, and so he had to wait, I think, in Italy or somewhere for a little while till he got here. So he's been Israeli ever since. Both my other brothers went to America. Now, I only have one brother in America left. The other one lives here in Radana. He came here 20-some years ago when he saw what was going on in America as far as intermarriage and how difficult it was getting to raise your children in a Jewish way. That was before the schools were being. Now you have many Jewish day schools in America, and the problem is not. But it's still, I mean, you see all the intermarriage going on there. It's just unbelievable. So my whole family really is here.
What made you come here? You came a year ago.
I came a year ago. I came here because of my children. And they were all here. So it was a normal thing to do. Actually, only 3 were there. I kept on thinking maybe some of them were going to come back, but nothing happened. One of them still. So I decided, I told my husband, we better go before we'll be the last one in this country. And we came, and my youngest daughter said, oh, you're leaving me behind? I'm like an orphan child. You're leaving me behind? And 4 weeks later, she showed up in Israel with all her belongings and her husband and her 3 children. Her husband was able to get a transfer. And so now all my children and grandchildren live here. Hopefully, they're not going to leave. It's a very difficult country, but they're all very Zionistic. Bnei Akiva turned them Zionistic. Although I'd say my son-in-law, the oldest, he's actually a product of Ner Yisrael in Baltimore, and he also came. Never went to Bnei Akiva, but he made Aliyah. It's very difficult here, but it's worth it.
Did you ever go back to Belgium?
I've not been able to do it yet. I've not wanted to do it yet. I was just afraid he was going to bring up just too many things. But I think now I'm ready to, and I want to go back. My brothers went back and so on. I just kept on saying, one of my brothers wanted me to come. I said, no, I just can't do it yet. But no, I think I want to go back now. As far as my friends and so on, there's nobody left. Everybody left. I belonged to Bachat in Brussels, and all the people from Bachat left. Those who didn't leave intermarried, and I wouldn't even know who they are. They all live in Israel or in America.
How did all this affect your life later?
Later? I'm not one to bring it out. For the longest time, I kept it very, very quiet and didn't even talk about it. I didn't want my children to be oppressed with that kind. My mother was talking a lot about the war and so on. I didn't want to do that to my kids. So they really didn't know too much. For a long, long time, they were so surprised to find out that they knew I came from Belgium, you know, and all that I actually went through a lot of this. I have one daughter that it affected. She's very much into all that. She goes as a guide every year. She takes these yeshiva girls and boys to Warsaw, to all the concentration camp, to all those different places. She just wants to know a lot about, and she made it her husband also. I mean, for the last 5 years, they go every year. And every year she comes back, really. It's very difficult, and she has a compulsion. She has to go. She has to be in the camps. She has to see that. She has to talk to the young people. They have to know. And so I guess I must have talked more about it than I think. But I try to really not, I tried not to burden my children too much. So I kept in a lot. Tried to live like a real American, you know. I didn't mix with any concentration camp people. I'm beyond that. But deep down, it wasn't like that. It wasn't like that at all. And my son is very much, my son is very straight young man. There's no gray with him. It's white or black. There's no nice Germans nowadays. They're all anti-Semites. They're all Nazis. He doesn't understand. He said, when I say, you know, it's a new generation, these people maybe had nothing to, don't give me that. There is no such thing. He just, for a while there, all he read was only World War II books or anything like that. I don't know if he's over that or not. And my other children were normal, but one of them married the son of a survivor. So he took his father last year. His father had been in Auschwitz and so on for many years. He took his father back to all the different places and to the shtetl that he came from and so on. And then my other daughter married an American, but they're very, very conscious of the fact that they are just ashes that revived, you know, because that's what it is.
During the war, did you know what was going on in Eastern Europe?
No, I don't think anybody knew. I don't think anybody knew. Nobody ever came back from the camps to be able to tell them. They knew there were working camps. My mother used to call it working camps. They want the young people to go to work, but then they wanted old people, and they couldn't understand why they wanted the old people. They thought they were sending the people out there to camp, to work. They thought it may not be good, and that it was very difficult, etc., but they did not know there was extermination camp. Nobody knew it was extermination camp. And this is, I'm talking about my parents who worked in the Jewish committee, who had contacts, who had different things. They did not know. And my mother always said after the war, they did not know. When those first people came back and said what was going on there, they didn't believe it. They did not believe it. So the Germans were able to hide it very, very well. I don't even know if all the Germans knew it, because it would have come out. They just knew that they treated the Jew like an animal, but I don't think they knew that they were extermination camp where they were out to just kill them.
So maybe they wouldn't have let those children go back to the parents if they would have known.
They tried very hard not to let the children go back to the parents. The parents were adamant, please send my kid. I remember one time there was a 3-year-old child who went back to the parents, and it was a child that was still wearing diapers. I remember that. They were explaining to the oldest on that group who was going to be in charge, because it was not a madrich or somebody who was going to bring him back. So the oldest child was 15 or 16, and there were 8 kids going back, and they showed this child how to diaper the baby. She was carrying the baby. It was a girl. They all went back to their parents to be murdered. Maybe between 50 and 100 that I know of. And most of these Kinderheims, the children survived there, because the Germans didn't get around to get them yet, if you got hold of the children. And I had a lot of friends who survived that way. I still have friends from Belgium. They survived that way because they were in children's home. They never saw their parents after the parents got taken.
They weren't told, Mum. Till the end, you said they weren't. They liquidated this Kinderheim in the end. I mean, before the end, actually. Like when you had to leave the Kinderheim.
Yeah, that's when they were all going to take them, but somehow it turned for the good, and these children became...
In the Kinderheim itself, what kind of a life did you have there?
Very basic, very basic, very, there weren't counselors and all that kind of stuff, you know. You had the administrator, the head of it, and he had to make do with whatever he had. His wife would peel the potatoes for 50 kids, you know, or whatever food there was, he had to make do with it. But the children weren't demanding. They knew they were I mean, you know, it's not that you got new clothing every now and then or new shoes. Wore the same shoes for I don't know how long. I don't ever remember having gotten a new pair of shoes. Just wonder how I survived the war with the same pair of shoes. I don't know. Because my foot must have grown. But I guess you go like that or something, I'm not sure. And the same with these kids. They didn't get clothing, they didn't get...
warmth? Nothing? Just...
No. They got warmth from each other. They got... if they knew this little child has nightmare every night and cries every night, so the older children would go over to that child. You don't have to worry, everything's fine here. Because it was annoying to have a kid cry there all the time, but you had a lot of kids who are like that. The stronger kids would take care of the other kids, you know, but there wasn't, a group, a krutza, all the 10-year-old ones and all the 12. It was just one group of kids. And you did the best you could with them. They lived in, you know, you did the best you could with them. There was no money, so how can you...
What would you do there all day long?
Well, they tried to give us, like I said,
schooling a bit.
Something that was like schooling. They would give us a piece of paper and a pencil, and they would teach us a little writing, or they would tell us stories, or they would tell us Jewish stories, Purim stories. We would practice how to say brachat, Shema. It was the administrator was Bamberger, and I think he could have been a rabbi, I'm not sure. So he was religious, and so he tried to see, he himself would give classes and different things like that. He tried to see that it was, but the children who came, some of them came from completely irreligious homes. They just had to accept whatever they were being taught. And but you know, there was no, everybody knew you don't make noise, a neighbor or whatever. If a neighbor, it wasn't just in a plain house that I was, one place that I remember because I was there the longest. If there were also places that were with gardens around out of the city, there you could make a little more noise or whatever. But you know, it's not like here where you have fun and you laugh and so on. Somebody could hear you, you're a Jewish child, you're not supposed to laugh. You giggle very quietly that nobody will hear it, or innocent children.
Ever come?
No, not that I know of. I think maybe they came, everybody was gone. If they came, everybody was gone. That's why we disappeared every now and then. They didn't give us any explanation. Why do you disappear? Why do we have to go away? Nobody asked questions. I think deep down everybody knew it's dangerous now. So.
What they meant, you meant disappeared and he came back to the same place after a day or two?
Sometimes, yes. Sometimes, yeah. And sometimes we just went to the next place. But I guess older children, even 2 years older, understood a lot more than I did when I was 6 and 7 and 8.
You just lived without questioning?
A lot, yeah. Yeah, there was no room for questions and answers. You made up your own answers, and the questions stayed in your head. And there was nobody to answer to you. They couldn't give you explanation. The older children would try to. The 14-year-olds, sometimes, if they were kind enough to, but they got a lot of responsibility helping the younger children. And I know that when I was 8, I was in charge of 2 teeny ones, little ones. It was automatic. I was in charge of the 2 little ones.
What did you have to do with them?
I don't know, diaper them and walk them or make them keep quiet. 1 and 2 year olders, you know. I remember I had 2 for a long time. I enjoyed that. I didn't mind it. It was like babysitting, but always quiet. Children knew how to be quiet. Couldn't give a big scream. Chas v'chalila, you know. Neighbors would hear, oh, Jews are making too much noise around here, so you don't want that. But you also had like a third sense. If I did walk on the street, always look around, and you kind of recognize this person doesn't look kosher. Let's go closer to the house, make believe we live in this house, or stuff like that, you know. You knew that right away. Or if a bomb came over you, you laid on the ground right away in the gutters. You just, street children, they know what to do, right? And that's what Jewish children were, necessity. Necessity is the mother of survival. So you know what to do. God put that in us.
Thank you very much.
Okay. The lady in front, where there is a little child in front of her, was a non-Jewish lady. And I am the little girl next to her. And I didn't realize it at the time, but I was told that all these people she hid somehow, not always in her house, but with friends. And through the whole war years, she was the one who would get, these people had fake names, etc., and she would get their food cards so that these people had food. Most of them were in her house because she lived in a big house. I think her husband was Jewish and had been taken. And she spent the war years helping Jewish people. A very fine lady. I was just visiting there. My brother was taking a picture. He was a good friend. He was 16 years old and he had friends everywhere. I enjoyed going there because this lady was rich and she had real food. I don't know any of the people. Personally, my brother would. He knew some of these people. Okay. Well, this sad little girl was me. Probably I was 6 or 7, I think maybe 7, before I started being, before I went into hidings and so on. At that time, I still lived with my parents, and my brothers were still in the city also. That was the beginning of the war. That's all. Okay, this is a picture of my brother and I. I am about 6 and he's probably 10 on that picture. Looks like these were the happy times still. Also the 1940, the beginning of the war. He's the one who was arrested later as a little spy in Switzerland. But he still has some good memories of Switzerland.